If you were to ask almost any sitting politician in the United States what the greatest threat to our national security is today, they'd likely give you the standard talking point about radical Islamic terrorism, regardless of which party they're in. But if you ask the same question to military leaders and national security experts, they wouldn't hesitate to tell you that the greatest threat to our national security is actually climate change. For over 10 years, intelligence agencies in the United States have warned the government and the public that climate change poses a risk greater than any we've seen in this nation. Yet, in spite of those warnings, the United States today remains relatively alone in both their denial of climate change and their total lack of action on the issue. Several lawsuits have been filed against the federal government to demand that they take action on the issue of climate change and enforce the laws that we already have on the books to protect our environment for future generations. One of these lawsuits was filed during and against the Obama administration, and the other was filed recently against the Trump administration. Both of these lawsuits were filed on behalf of children in the United States. With the help of groups like our Children's Trust and the Clean Air Council, children across the United States are banding together to demand that the government actually do their job and protect our air, water, and soil for future generations. In their lawsuit, these children claim that the decisions to expand fossil fuel development, pull out of the Paris Climate Accords, and approve projects like the Keystone XL pipeline are all going to contribute to the growing threat of climate change, a threat that these children will be facing head on long after these politicians who approve these decisions have left this world. Joining me now to talk about these lawsuits is Farron Cousins. He's the executive director of the Trial Lawyer magazine. Farron, start by telling us the basis for these lawsuits being filed and who are they going after?
Well, right now we've got lawsuits that are going after the former Obama administration. They're going after President Donald Trump, Scott Pruitt, the head of the EPA, and several other state governments throughout the country. And they're all saying the exact same thing. They're saying that these, typically old white men who are calling the shots, or in Obama's case, just a standard politician, doesn't even have to be a white man in that instance, but, basically these old guys are calling the shots, allowing the environment to be raped and pillaged by corporations, doing nothing about it, and the children in this country are the ones who are going to suffer, and luckily the children have said, look, we're not going to let you destroy our future, so we're going to hold you accountable for the Keystone XL pipeline. We're going to hold you accountable for opening up these new coal mines that are going to add CO2 and other toxic emissions to our atmosphere, and they're not going to take it anymore. And that's what these lawsuits are saying. Every decision that these politicians have made is going to come back and bite us in the bottom, while you will be long gone from planet Earth by the time the effects of these decisions really take hold here in the United States and across the entire planet.
Farron, what's so amazing, anybody in the media business will tell you that they can run a story about climate change and it's like a yawn moment. Now think about that. This is the biggest story in the country. Now they can run a story about Donald Trump doing something in Asia and it's going to be eaten up by everybody who wants to know the details. But when you talk about climate change that has potential to kill our grandchildren, kill our entire planet, it's like a yawn moment where it comes to getting people to even look at the story. What is your take on that? I know you've seen it firsthand. We've talked about it before. What's your take?
That's exactly how it is. And, to kind of hit back on a point you made in the intro there, the fact that politicians will ignore climate change, they're always going to go back to, no, our greatest threat is radical Islamic terrorism. In fact, in 2015, the very first Democratic debate, back when we still had, I think, 5 people on that stage, the very first question that was asked of those politicians was, what's the greatest threat to the national security of the United States? And all 4 people on that stage, with the exception of Bernie Sanders, said Islamic terrorism. Bernie Sanders said climate change.
Right. It's not just the baby boomer generation. Understand, these are millennials that don't think this story is important enough to even, we know what the traffic is. I mean, we've got all the metrics. You can ask anybody in this business of media, do they go to these stories? And the answer is no. Will they go to a story, about what Kim Kardashian won some award last night? Yeah, they'll go there, but they won't go to a climate change story when it's their lives and it's the lives of their children that are involved here. Let me ask you, the first case that was filed has already made it through some impressive legal hurdles. Tell us about those hurdles.
Well, the groups involved in that suit, well, I should say the ones being sued in that particular instance, tried to get the case thrown out. They went to the judge and they said, look, this case has no merit. You cannot prove that these children and these groups representing them have any standing to hold us accountable. And the judge in that case just a few months ago said, actually, these kids do have standing. There is plenty of evidence to bring this case forward, and I'm going to let it go to trial. The trial for that case is actually set for the beginning of February in 2018. So we're not far off from this case actually going to trial. And so for the judge to come out and dismiss the claims of those being sued by saying, no, these children have every right to take you to court and hold you responsible, or at the very least allow a jury to make that decision, that is probably one of the biggest steps forward on the issue of climate change that the United States has ever made.
It's a wise decision. There's really this is no different than somebody living along a river, right? And so some company pollutes the river, and the people who live along the river get to say, we have a claim because we've been affected by it. There is no difference. And the judges that threw these types of things out early on were just they completely missed the point. And usually they missed the point because the early ones were very conservative judges who really didn't want this case to go forward. You know, I'll tell you who doesn't want this case to go forward are the Exxons and the folks that were responsible for this. If you go back and look at the early documents, they knew exactly what was going on. And there's no difference. I mean, if they're killing people because of those decisions, in any world that would be called manslaughter, wouldn't it? So, I mean, there's plenty to go forward with, and I'd be amazed if even an appellate court says, no, we've got to stop this case. The Trump administration's been repealing environmental regulations since their first few days in office, and corporations seem to think this is the greatest thing ever. Won't this actually end up being a really bad move for corporations in the long run in terms of liability? Because I got to tell you something, it's just a matter of time. It is just absolutely a matter of time. What's your take?
Well, it really is just a matter of time for these people. And unfortunately, time is something that the CEOs of these chemical companies and the fossil fuel companies do not have. You know, back prior to the 1980s, the average tenure of a CEO in the United States was about 15 to 20 years. Today, it's between 3 and 5 years. So they don't care about the long-term consequences. They don't care about the toxic waste they're dumping today, causing cancer in people 10 years down the road, because they'll be so far removed from that company that it won't matter to them. You kick the can down the road, you let the next CEO deal with it, or even the next one after that. You get your golden parachute, and then you go become CEO of another company. That's how it works today. There's no more long-term liability. It's let everybody else deal with it. So even if the Trump administration repeals these regulations and we get more toxic waste in the water or in the air, it still creates a liability for corporations who are going to end up being sued for this when we find out it causes cancer or pancreatitis or kidney failure or 100 other different deadly diseases for American citizens, because that's always the case with what happens. Just because government says you can dump it doesn't mean the courts aren't going to turn around and say, well, you caused cancer for this entire community, so we're going to hold you liable for that. What is called,
to close this thing down, what is called is externalizing all the risks. These CEOs are moving through, they're making their big money, they're leaving as much garbage behind as they want because they're not worried about it. It almost takes a sociopath to analyze this world the way that we've seen these energy companies analyze this problem with climate change. It almost has to be a total sociopath who says, you know, I really don't care what's going to happen to my great-grandchildren or my children. I really don't care. They're talking about their own family, as long as I'm taken care of today. Look, thanks for joining me, Farron. This is a case that we're certainly going to follow as it makes its way through the courts.